Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 4, Past, Present and Future Races from Facing the Sphinx by Marie L. Farrington. Chapter 3, Past, Present and Future Races. Necessity and chance approach me not, and what I will is fate. The word creation, as we understand it, with an anthropomorphic God who has existed eternally in idleness and who draws everything out of nothing, is so supremely ridiculous that it never entered the more rational conceptions of the ancients. Even the Hindus of our 19th century cannot comprehend such a ludicrous idea. In a dialogue between the Eternal Father and the Superintendent of the Milky Way, Eugene Nuss exclaims humorously, "There are, however, some people down below who pretend that in your whole existence you worked only 1 week, and that from the first Sunday on, you have remained with crossed arms, looking on." To this the Almighty answers, "It is easily understood that those people have not to fill up space. Who has been relating to them such fictions? A man who pretends that you spoke to him from a burning bush. In my whole life I never spoke to anyone from any burning bush, but I do so through the voices of blackbirds and linnets, and I have never seen any fiery bush except in decorations of theaters. That man has taken advantage of the innocence of his brethren. If they have invented many things like that about me, they must have conceived a very queer ideal of what I am on the superficie of yonder abortive planet." And so it is. Our sun is only a third-class luminary, and the Earth is neither the largest nor the best planet. It is not provided with such a beautiful system of rings as Saturn, or with as many satellites as either of the larger planets which move around our yellow sun. Our superiority exists only in our conceit, and while we know scientifically that not 1 inch of space can be called empty, it is reasonable to deduce that the universe existed before our Earth was born into our present planetary system, and that it would continue to do so should our globe disappear now. The universe is boundless, limitless, and there is not a finger's breadth of void space anywhere, for matter is eternal, only it is forever undergoing transformations. We find a true system of cosmogenesis in ancient manuscripts that is common to every prehistoric nation. The same ideas abound in Hebraic Genesis, though the thick veil of symbolism that surrounds them has largely contributed towards misleading mankind. The Central American nations possessed an original quiche document which is known under the name of Manuscript of Chichicastenango. The same arrangement prevails in it. In every description relating to cosmic evolution, the narrator seems to be bent upon keeping back from the common herd the mysteries of the awakening of slumbering energies. Through the preconcerted darkness of the quiche text, one can perceive the skillful hand of the priests of ancient times lowering the veil of symbolism upon the recital of the evolution of our planet. In the beginning, no name is given to the divinity. The formation of the universe, says the manuscript, proclaims the existence of a first cause and is the incontestable proof of it. The Immaculate One stands alone above the thoughts of the vulgar. They knew of its existence. Wise men worshipped it, but as it was formless and shapeless, no temple, no altar could be dedicated to it. O first and greatest God, by gods adored, we own thy power, our Father and our Lord. Iliad. The Jews, says Reverend Robert Taylor, had a superstition of not uttering the incomparable name of God. They had a good reason not to utter it, as they were not allowed to know it. Among the ancient nations, it was a secret which was communicated only to the highest initiates. And even in Genesis, in the initial chapters, there is no such word as God, but the collective name Elohim is used throughout. It is, however, in the philosophical schools of India that this system of an ever-existing principle is best expounded. The same doctrine is re-echoed by Hegel, who identifies absolute being or benesse with non-being and represents the universe as an eternal becoming. No one has ever given a better definition of the universal laws that rule the visible and invisible space than a sage of our present era. The present is the child of the past, the future the begotten of the present, and yet, O present moment, knowest thou not that thou hast no parent, nor canst thou have a child, that thou art ever begetting but thyself? Before thou hast even begun to say, I am the progeny of the departed moment, the child of the past, thou hast become that past itself before thou utterest the last syllable. Behold, thou art no more the present, but verily that future. Thus are the past, the present, And the future, the ever-living Trinity in one Mahamaya, or the Absolute is? In the Quiche cosmogony, we find conceptions conforming exactly with the teachings of the wisest in nations. Thus he was, when all was quiet and calm, when all was peaceful and silent, when nothing yet had stirred in the void of space. The image of earth did not yet appear, the sea surrounded heaven, but all was shapeless, breathless, nothing was visible, all was motionless and peaceful, and amidst that infinite calm only the indescribable one was. Dimly at first, a small speck appeared slowly moving on the boundless ocean. It assumed gradually the form of a boat, sailing towards an unknown region. Out of the pitch-like darkness came the fathers and generators wrapped in sky-blue robes, and they were named Gukumats, which means serpent with dazzling azure wings, for they were illustrious sages, great scientific masters. They produced heaven, and but for them the heart of heaven exists. This agrees perfectly well with the theory of a central sun adopted by many occultists and philosophers, and partially recognized by scientists who acknowledge that there must be a central point somewhere in the Milky Way. We find also a repetition of the doctrine of universal life, which was taught by the ancients, to which human mind is returning now, and which science is sullenly admitting by tracing its signs everywhere. It was Plato's anima mundi, a doctrine as old as the world. The central sun of the occultists, science has accepted astronomically, for it cannot deny the presence in sidereal space of a central body in the Milky Way, a point unseen and mysterious, the ever-hidden center of attraction of our sun and planetary system. While the Western occultists and Jewish Kabbalists claim that in this sun the Godhead is especially present, they accordingly refer to it the volitional acts of a supreme being modeled upon the pattern furnished by theologians. The Eastern initiates, however, take a different view of the subject. They maintain, says a modern author, that as the superdivine essence of the unknown absolute is equally in every domain and place, the central sun is simply the center of universal life, electricity, the reservoir within which that divine radiance, already differentiated at the beginning of every creation, is focused. Though still in a layer or neutral condition, it is nevertheless the one attracting as also the ever-emitting life center. Now, if we accept the theory of universal life, we must admit the different creations mentioned in ancient manuscripts. In an old Mexican document, 4 attempts at creating a perfect man are referred to. It is called the manuscript of Chimalpopoca. Among the Quiches, the attempts are only 3, as enumerated in the manuscript of Chichicastenango. If we bear in mind that America and India drew their information from their Atlantean ancestors, we will not wonder at the coincidence of their traditions. The ancients, says the Codex Chimalpopoca, knew that in the year 1, Toctli, Toltec and Aztec sacred chronology, the sky and earth had emerged out of chaos, and that when it occurred thrice previously, life had been manifested on this planet, and man had appeared on earth for a 4th time. They also had an exact knowledge of the date corresponding to each periodical reawakening, and used to claim that from ashes God had formed man on the 7th day, but to Quetzalcoatl they attributed the honor of producing a perfect human being. The same idea is repeatedly expressed in the Kabbalah, in the Book of Concealed Mystery, in the Greater Holy Assembly, and in the Lesser Holy Assembly. Those fruitless attempts at creating a perfect physical man are recorded in the passages describing the appearance and disappearance of the Edomite kings. And there are kings which have reigned in ADVM Edom, in the land of Edom, that is in the place wherein all judgments exist. Here we feel bound to remind the reader that the science of gematria, or first division of the so-called literal Kabbalah, is based on the correspondence between words and numbers and their relative numerical value, each Hebrew letter representing also a quantity. Thus, in the above quotation, the sense of the sentence is contained in the word ADVM equals 1 plus 4 plus 6 plus 40 equals 51 equals na equals failure. Na, being synonymous with 51, expresses pain and also unbalanced force, which is the source of failure. Consequently, the 7 Edomite kings refer to the prior worlds as well as to the first races. And because that constitution of Adam was not as yet found, they could not subsist nor be conformed, and they were destroyed. Have they then been abolished? And are all these included? For truly they were abolished that they might be withdrawn from form, until there should come forth the representative of Adam. We could quote extensively from the books of the Kabbalah concerning the subject of prior worlds and early earthly races, which were only expressions of unbalanced force. But we will end our digression by stating that our race began, according to Cabalistical reckonings, when the sun entered the sign of the bull, having in opposition the scorpion, which embodies the symbol of the generative principle. It was followed by the balance when the sun entered the zodiacal division of the ram. In the Quiche manuscript, we find the following version. After having brought forth the earth with its mountains, forests, and seas, and having replenished them with animals of all species, the gods who accompanied the blue-feathered serpent proceeded to the formation of man, but twice they failed in their undertaking. In their first attempt, they brought out a man of clay, a fragile, worthless thing who melted under the first shower of rain. Disgusted with their first offspring, the creators abandoned him to his fate without giving up their self-imposed task. It becomes apparent that they realized that a more substantial creature alone could withstand the climatic changes which our planet was undergoing. Consequently, they met with such insuperable obstacles in their endeavor to form a being suitable to existing conditions that they required the assistance of two powerful chiefs of the magic art. The latter responded promptly to the call of their masters. They traced lines and circles, they scattered grains of corn and pieces of dogwood or zite around, they addressed invocations to the sun, and behold, a wooden man appeared, followed by a Chibak woman, i.e. made of the marrow of the iris, reed. While creating these new beings, the gods had intended to correct the defects of the race that was modeled out of clay, yet they failed again. Those wooden men looked stiff, they had neither blood, fat, nor fluidic element. They were ungraceful. Their complexion was sallow, their hands and feet were dried up, and though they were endowed with a tongue, they lacked intelligence. They propagated their species so rapidly that the whole earth was soon swarming with beings who resembled them. They were so ungrateful that they brought upon them the wrath of their divine makers, whom they forgot as soon as they came out of their hands. Therefore they were doomed to destruction. A burning shower of bitumen and resin rained upon them. However, this ill-fated race did not entirely perish, because the celestial creators wished to preserve a small number of them to perpetuate the remembrance of the wooden men they had generated. They live now in woods and forests, and are known to us under the name of apes. The passage describing the emerging of the human race at the dawn of the third creation begins as follows. Here we must consider man and what could compose his flesh, for so far he had none. If we admit the immortality of the soul, or rather that something, whatever its name may be, survives our body, that something must have always been in existence, at least in essence, or it would perish, on the principle that what has a beginning must have an end. The universe, says a modern philosopher, is not an effect, it is the cause of all effects. Every being it contains is the necessary effect of this cause, which sometimes shows us its manner of acting, but generally conceals its operations. Men use the word chance to hide their ignorance of true causes, which, though not understood, act not less, according to certain laws. There is no effect without a cause. Nature is a word used to denote the immense assemblage of beings, various matter, infinite combinations, and diversified motions that we behold. All bodies, organized or unorganized, are necessary effects of certain causes. Nothing in nature can happen by chance. Everything is subject to fixed laws. These laws are only the necessary connection of certain effects with their causes. One atom of matter cannot meet another by chance. This meeting is the effect of permanent laws which cause every being necessarily to act as it does and hinder it from acting otherwise. In given circumstances, to talk of the fortuitous concourse of atoms or to attribute some effects to chance is merely saying that we are ignorant of the laws by which bodies act, meet, combine, or separate. If we substitute the words divine interference for chance, we have an irresistible argument in favor of an ever-existing principle which we are all agreed to call matter. Such argument, if adopted as a fact, would become the death blow to all special creation theories and render it absolutely necessary to admit the existence of lost continents and diversified races. It would strengthen the belief founded upon hoary traditions of human species differently framed from our historical generations, and endowed with qualities not pertaining to our present races. Geologists have forcibly demonstrated the transformations that the animal kingdom has undergone from the Eocene period. But anthropologists have done less towards clearing up the mystery that surrounds man's early existence. Professor Baumgartner says, "The first men who proceeded from the germs of animals beneath them lived first in a lava state." The point is essentially important but not thoroughly true because it has not been proven yet whether man was first to appear on Earth or animals preceded him. Occultists assure us that human beings were evolved before their dumb brothers, and that the latter were the result of man's cast-off tissues. They give us a very plausible story of the early races and allow us a glimpse into the mysterious records of bygone ages. In the Kabbalah and in the Eastern philosophical works, we find an elaborate system in which man emanates from a group of 7 celestial men. The same idea permeates the first chapter of Genesis, in which Elohim, not God as translated, is the principal actor. And Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. It means simply that the first race was composed of ethereal beings, spiritual but lacking the intelligence which had to be acquired through a long course of training upon our little planet Earth. There was no sex discernible in either animals or men, and they developed monstrous bodies which were adapted to their coarse surroundings. As light was the first wish expressed by Elohim, so sight must have been the first sense which men acquired in the early period when they were generated by the divine creators, as expressed in the Quiche text. At the close of what the Buddhists call the first round, man must have become more material, thus falling surely, though slowly, into generation. Of that first race, science cannot identify any remains in the lower strata of the primordial epoch, for there are none. How long man retained a sufficiency of his spiritual nature to control matter is hard guesswork. Traditions and legends remember only the epoch when he had developed a gigantic stature and had become an enemy of his own spiritual ancestors. In the Greek theogony, Gaia, the earth, unites herself to Uranus, or heaven, and begets the first gods, better known under the names of Cyclopes, Titans, and Centimenes. Prompted by their mother, they conspire against their father and induce Kronos, the youngest and bravest of them, to lay violent hands on Uranus. In Genesis, a story somewhat similar to the pagan version is related in chapter 6. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Hesiod records also the tradition about the men of the age of bronze, the admixture of 2 metals being very significant, whom Jupiter had made out of ashwood, and who had hearts harder than diamonds. Clad in bronze from head to foot, they passed their lives fighting. So was one of the Central American races made out of wood, and so were their giants, proud and overbearing. Thus we find a popular belief among the ancients resting on a truthful basis. Madame Blavatsky, the expounder of the occultists' doctrines, avers that the men of the third race were the ancestors of the Atlanteans. They were just such ape-like, intellectually senseless giants as were those beings who, during the third period, represented humanity. Morally irresponsible, it was these third race men who, through promiscuous connection with animal species lower than themselves, created the missing link, which became, ages later in the tertiary period only, the remote ancestor of the real ape as we find it now in the pithecoid family. Again, we find occult doctrines agreeing with ancient legends as preserved in the Quiche manuscript. However, the whole race did not entirely perish. The divine creators preserved a small number of those ungrateful beings in memory of the wooden men they had generated. They live now in woods and forests and are known to us by the name of apes. This theory dissents from Darwinism, surely, but it has been eagerly caught by some men of science. Among them, a well-known Hanoverian is showing with great ingenuity that Darwin was wholly mistaken in tracing man back to the ape. On the contrary, he maintains that it is the ape which is evolved from man. This is a purely Brahmanic, Buddhistic, and Cabalistic philosophy resting on the inevitable law of necessity which rules in every manifestation of matter and governs the growth and decadence or degeneration of every race. If we consider the truthful assertion that the earth began by being a liquid ball of fire, a protoplasmic phantom of what it is now, we must conclude that man must have followed the course of his mother and have been also a fiery ball, which acquired solidity in the course of time. It is rational to deduce, therefore, that he was sexless at first, developed into an androgynous being, and at last separated into male and female. According to the Hindu calendar, the separation of sexes occurred 18,618,728 years ago. The third race is called by the occultists the sons of passive yoga, because it was produced unconsciously by the second race, which, because it was intellectually inactive, is supposed to have been constantly plunged in a kind of blank or abstract contemplation as required by the conditions of the yoga state. How quickly they progressed materially and intellectually can be only surmised if we accept the traditions of occultism, which depict the Lemuro-Atlantean of the closing third race as a highly civilized individual. During the early geological periods, men built large cities, cultivated arts and sciences, possessed a knowledge of natural laws which we are only recovering slowly, and were experts in astronomy and mathematics is incontrovertible. The further we push our researches, the more convincing the argument becomes. Take, for example, the Book of Nabatean Agriculture. Dr. Coulson agrees with Quatremere that it contains no trace of Christianity or of the existence of Arsacian, Seleucian, and Sassanidan rule. 20 Babylonian kings are enumerated in the Agriculture, and of these 20 names, there is not one which coincides with that of a king of any known Babylonian dynasty. In separating into their respective classes the quotations which are mingled together in the Agriculture, the finds at Babylon are rich and varied literature, fully equal to that which was developed among the Greeks several thousand years later. All the sages mentioned are priests, founders of religions, moralists, naturalists, astronomers, agriculturists, and are universally endeavoring to introduce a worship freed from idolatrous superstitions. Now the word Nabatean comes from Nebo, the deity of the planet Mercury, and the god of wisdom Mercury was also Hermes. Thus Nebo, Mercury, and Hermes represent the same idea and link three great nations of ancient times closely together. Their remains disclose no nascent civilization. On the contrary, they exhibit an uninterrupted line of evidences tending to prove that they enjoyed all the benefits of highly cultured nations. But the origin thereof is lost in the night of time. In Hesiod's Theogony, we find the evolution of the human race from a spiritual plane down to our present physical state, graphically described, and the history of the growth and disappearance of the continents on which men thrived is fully recorded. As Uranus destroyed his children from Gaia by confining them in the bosom of the earth, Tithia, so Kronos, at the second stage of creation, destroyed his children from Rhea by devouring them, an allusion to the fruitless efforts of nature to produce real human men, which we have previously quoted from the Quiche text. Then comes Zeus Jupiter, who dethroned his father, the same disrespectful son found in every cosmogony. He is described by Hermes as the heavenly man or Pimander, and by Moses under the name of Adam and Ham. Uranus is the Varuna of the Hindus. It embodies the grandest conception of archaic races and is synonymous with the coelum of the Latins, or a vault, a hollow, a concave extension which unites with the earth, or terra. The latter word is derived from the past participle tersa, the dry element, in opposition to mare, the wet element, and reveals the fundamental basis of the Mosaic Genesis and of every cosmogony and the principal structure of all religions in their primeval phases of heavenly and earthly dualities. It takes earth and water to create a human soul, says Moses. Adam, Jehovah, Brahma, and Mars are in one sense identical because they are all symbols of primitive or initial generative powers for the purpose of human procreation. The word Adam means red, and so does Brahma, Viraj, while the planet Mars is depicted red by astronomers, and the god Mars, as well as Jehovah, was the god of war and bloodshed. Water is understood to be the blood of the earth, and the names of the deities connected with the divine generators of mankind are synonymous with either earth or water. Mars is identical with Kartikeya, who in one sense is the god of war of the Hindus and was born of the sweat of Siva and the earth. In the Mahabharata, he is shown as born without the intervention of a woman, and he is called Lohita, the red, like Adam and the other first men. Hence, the author of The Source of Measure is quite right in thinking that Mars, and all the other gods of like attributes, being the gods of war and of bloodshed, were the outgrowth of a secondary idea flowing out of the primary one of shedding blood in conception for the first time. Hence Jehovah became later a fighting god, Lord of hosts, and one who commanded war. Plato states that the deity geometrizes in fabricating the universe, and his assertion is corroborated in the Sefer, Jezira, or numbers of creation, in which the whole process of evolution is given out in numbers. In its 32 paths of wisdom, the number 3 is repeated 4 times, and the number 4 5 times. Therefore, the wisdom of the creating powers is contained in numbers. The word Sefer or Sephra, when unvoweled, means to cipher. And Al-Him, 31,415 to 1, said, "Let there be light, 20,612 to 6,561. In the Zohar and the Sefer Jezira, the archaic doctrines could have been traced back to their original sources. But what was left of them was subsequently embodied in the Pentateuch proper, and especially in Genesis. The latter contains sublime pages referring to the manifestation of matter in its secondary stage, but theogony is left out, and the word God is certainly not mentioned in the initial chapters of Genesis, the collective name of Elohim being used throughout in the original text. And Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So Elohim created man in his own image, in the image of Elohim created he him. Male and female created he them. This passage is constantly misconstrued, for it does not refer to our present supremely material race, but to the heavenly man of the Cabalists, the collective group of celestial men of the occultists, the companions of the azure-winged serpent of the Quiches, the gods, creators, and generators of the human race. Male and female created he them does not refer to one single man, but to many emanating from their divine prototypes and endowed with the power of reproducing their species. They were androgynous, as stated so explicitly in the passage just quoted. This first man is the Sephirothal host of the Kabbalists, and is entirely different from the Adam of the second chapter. That it must have been an ethereal being is conclusively deduced by the second chapter, in which we find an unanswerable sentence. "And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground," is a flat contradiction to the hypothesis that the man of the first chapter was a human being with flesh and bone. He was, on the contrary, a shadow, an astral form, like the plants and animals which were following the same course of evolution delineated by his prototypes, and the earth itself was still a fluidic mass. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. Here we can notice the first initiatory step toward materializing the earth and everything thereon, and the second, Adam, appears. He is not modeled at the likeness of Elohim. And Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. As we understand that Elohim here represents the 3 lowest spiritual beings of the Sephirothal host, we may infer that while one of them made earthly Adam of dust, the other breathed into him the breath of life, and the third one made him a living soul, all of which is implied in the plural number of Elohim. The being thus evolved is still mindless, non-intelligent. It is only in the third Adam, the one in which the sexes separate, that the rebellion of matter against spirit becomes manifest. That they were both naked and were not ashamed proves their innocence and their lack of intelligence. Adam is the personification of a dual being, the creator, a celestial being, and his progeny, the terrestrial Adam, who had only nephesh, the breath of life, and received a living soul into his material body after his fall. Thus the word Adam was a form of universal symbol which even among the Jews indicated 4 distinct races. 1, an ethereal, shadowy, spiritual man. 2, a protoplastic, androgynous being. 3, an innocent Adam made of dust. 4, the fallen Adam, progenitor of our own race. That men were evolved at first without being begotten, and had to develop the 5 senses we possess now successively, according to the immutable laws that govern this universe, we cannot doubt. We may be assured also that during the immense geological periods required for the solidification of the earth, Beings analogous to her extant condition swarmed in her bosom and on her surface as they do now. What keeps mankind plunged into abject ignorance is the double sense of sacred writings. Aeschylus, author of the trilogy and Prometheus Bound, was condemned to be stoned to death, being charged with sacrilege by the Athenians for revealing the mysteries. In every age it has been dangerous to depart from prejudices consecrated by opinion. All that the most enlightened men could do was to speak ambiguously, though from a base complaisance. They often mix falsehood with truth. Several had a double doctrine, one public and the other secret. And as no key was available except to initiates, their true sentiments have become unintelligible and have given rise to all theological doctrines. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.